live in interesting times.
For the headlines.
5 people were killed when at least 2 buildings collapsed near Manila after a powerful earthquake set skyscrapers swaying and drove terrified locals into the streets.
Sri Lanka said it believed a local Islamist extremist group was behind deadly suicide bomb blasts that killed nearly 300 people as it announced a national state of emergency beginning midnight.
Ukraine takes a leap into the unknown after comedian Volodymyr Zelensky won the presidency with promises of change but only a vague blueprint of what he will do as leader.
And Japanese authorities hit former Nissan boss Carlos Ghosn with a fresh charge of aggravated breach of trust, the 4th formal indictment against the auto sector tycoon, who immediately filed for bail.
I'm Alma Angeles, wherever you're watching from around the world. Thank you very much for joining us.
We welcome our viewers here in the Philippines and around the world. Good evening, everyone. I'm Sam Cepeda.
And now to the news. A strong 6.3 magnitude earthquake struck the Philippine island of Luzon on Monday afternoon, according to the U.S. Geological Survey. Take a look. The earthquake was centered about 60 kilometers northwest of the capital city of Manila, which is home to more than 12 million people. At least 5 fatalities have been confirmed so far in Pampanga province, according to Pampanga Disaster Officer Angie Blanco. More than 20 other people were injured due to collapsed buildings and walls in the province. The earthquake caused damage to a church in northern Pampanga province, and it also caused boulders to roll down a mountain, blocking a highway in the region. Metro Rail Transit suspended operations for the remainder of Monday following the quake to allow workers to check the integrity of the track throughout the network. Power disruptions were reported in the provinces of Pangasinan, La Union, Pampanga, and Bataan. City of Manila reported that buildings were swaying in the business district of the city. Several flights into and out of the northern Philippines were delayed or canceled following the earthquake. Some people have also evacuated from buildings as a precaution following the strong earthquake. Meanwhile, dry and warm weather is expected across the region into the middle of the week, aiding in any recovery efforts. Now, the Philippines is located on the Ring of Fire, a seismically active band of volcanoes in the Pacific Ocean.
Photos and video on social media show schools and buildings being evacuated in Manila. In these pictures taken by Eagle News reporter Moira Encina, Department of Justice employees are seen waiting outside the building after an earthquake was felt in the premises. Meanwhile, these are pictures taken by Jeffrey Angeles, where workers and shoppers from Eastwood City and surrounding residential areas gather outside after the earthquake rocks parts of Metro Manila. Employees of the DFA went outside after earthquake. Here are the gates of MRT Shaw Boulevard, now closed to public. Commuters have been advised of the MRT-3 suspension of operations due to the quake.
Meanwhile, here's an update. 5 people were killed when at least 2 buildings collapsed as a strong earthquake rocked the northern Philippines, according to a local official. Provincial Governor Lilia Pineda said 3 bodies have been pulled out of a collapsed building in the town of Porac, while an old woman and her grandchild were crushed to death by another building in the town of Lubao. Take a look. She also said that the quake has caused a blackout. Now that is hampering rescue efforts in the early evening as night closed in.
In Indonesia, Bali's Mount Agung erupted early on Sunday morning at about 3:21. Authorities maintained a 4-kilometer exclusion zone around the mountain amid concerns of further explosions. The volcano's constant activity is sparking fears thousands of travelers could be stranded on the holiday island. The eruption sent thick volcanic ash cloud into the air, making it unsafe for planes to fly in or out. Mount Agung is the tallest mountain on Bali, reaching more than 3,140 meters high. 2 other active volcanoes on the island, Mount Bromo and Mount Merapi, are also on alert with exclusion zones in place.
The death toll from the bomb blast that ripped through churches and luxury hotels in Sri Lanka rose dramatically to 290, including dozens of foreigners. Now, police announced new arrests over the country's worst attacks for more than a decade. More than 500 people were injured in the Catholic Easter Sunday assault that saw suicide bombers hit the 3 high-end hotels popular with foreign tourists and 3 churches, unleashing carnage in Colombo and beyond. 2 additional blasts were triggered as security forces carried out raids searching for suspects. There was no immediate claim of responsibility, but police said Monday 24 people had been arrested. Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe calls on Sri Lankans to be united.
While this goes on, we must also look into why adequate precautions were not taken in this respect. But first and foremost, we have to ensure that terrorism does not lift its head in Sri Lanka. We cannot allow that. And we are prepared to take all measures necessary to ensure that terrorism is contained and wiped out in this country. Therefore, the police and the armed forces are taking necessary action. And I must, on this occasion, in addition to offering my grief for the 200-odd people who died.
A nationwide curfew imposed after the blast was lifted early Monday and life returned gradually to the streets of the capital, though the government has ordered a 2-day holiday and schools and the Colombo Stock Exchange were closed. But the country remained on edge as a homemade bomb was defused at a Colombo airport late Sunday and massive security deployed. According to documents seen by AFP, the country's police chief warned top officers 10 days ago of possible suicide bomb attacks on churches, and the Indian High Commission by the National Tawhid Jamaat, or NTJ, a radical Muslim group in Sri Lanka. He cited reports by a foreign intelligence agency according to the documents. Authorities have said they will look into whether the attackers had any overseas links. There have been no attacks in Sri Lanka linked to foreign Islamist groups, but in January, police seized a haul of explosives and detonators following the arrest of 4 men from a newly formed radical group. Powerful explosions struck in quick succession at 3 hotels in the capital, Colombo. The Cinnamon Grand was hit at around 8:30 a.m. Sunday, and the Shangri-La soon after at 9:05 a.m. The Kingsbury Hotel was also hit. 3 churches were also targeted in that wave of blasts. Colombo's historic St. Anthony Shrine, the St. Sebastian's Church in the town of Negombo, north of the capital, and the Zion Church in the east coast town of Batticaloa. All 6 blasts were suicide bombs. At least 37 foreigners were among the dead, citizens of India, Britain, Turkey, Australia, Japan, and Portugal, as well as a dual U.S.-British passport holder.
Heavy security is present outside the St. Sebastian's Church in Negombo, north of Colombo, one of a string of churches and hotels hit by attacks on Easter Sunday that killed nearly 300 people. Residents were in shock. Take a look.
No injuries, nothing, but they saw, because they were sitting outside. It was so crowded, so they were sitting outside, and they saw one man coming, a very young man, looking very innocent, very calm, with a heavy bag like me, but very heavy bag. So they touched my small daughter, touched her, and took the road, go inside the church. They saw, and suddenly they heard the blast. They quickly ran away, took the vehicle and went away from the church because they were so afraid. They called me, same time they called me and asked me whether I am inside the church or no. They wanted to make sure, but that time I was another church.
The blasts hit the 3 churches when they were full of worshippers gathered for Catholic Easter services. More than 500 people were injured in the bombings on churches and hotels. At least 37 foreigners died, according to the government, including 3 Britons, 2 Turkish nationals, a Portuguese citizen, and 2 people holding both British and American passports. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said several U.S. citizens were among those killed. 3 Danes, a Japanese citizen, 2 Chinese nationals, and at least 5 Indians were also died in the attacks, their respective governments confirmed. Stef Blok, the Netherlands foreign minister, said on Twitter that 1 Dutch national was among the victims, a 54-year-old woman, according to Dutch newspaper Ad. The Sri Lankan Foreign Ministry said 9 foreign nationals have been reported missing, and there are 25 unidentified bodies believed to be of foreigners. Some Sri Lankans asked how the attacks could have happened after it emerged there had been a warning about possible blasts. Police Chief Pujut Jayasundara issued an intelligence alert to top officers on April 11, warning that suicide bombers from a group called the National Tawhid Jamaat, or NTJ, a radical Muslim group linked to the vandalization of Buddhist statues, plan to hit prominent churches. Police said a total of 24 people have now been detained over the attacks, but have not provided any details about them. Ethnic and religious violence has plagued Sri Lanka for decades, with a 37-year conflict with Tamil rebels, followed by an upswing in recent years in clashes between the Buddhist majority and Muslims. Island nations suffered deadly militant attacks for years, especially by ethnic Tamil militants, during a decades-long civil war that ended in 2009 when Sri Lankan forces crushed the insurgency.
Meanwhile, world leaders have condemned the series of blasts in Sri Lanka that killed at least 290 people. A month after dozens of Muslims were killed in a shooting at 2 mosques in Christchurch, New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern described the Sri Lanka attack as devastating. New Zealand condemns all acts of terrorism, and our resolve has only been strengthened by the attack on our soil on the 15th of March. To see an attack in Sri Lanka while people were in churches and at hotels is devastating. Meanwhile, U.S. President Donald Trump tweeted heartfelt condolences from the people of the United States to the people of Sri Lanka on the horrible terrorist attacks on churches and hotels. We stand ready to help. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi condemned the horrific blast and said his country stands with the people of Sri Lanka, strongly condemned the horrific blast in Sri Lanka. There is no place for such barbarism in our region. India stands in solidarity with the people of Sri Lanka. My thoughts are with the bereaved families and prayers with the injured. Meanwhile, Pakistan also condemned the attacks. Prime Minister Imran Khan said Pakistan stands in complete solidarity with Sri Lanka. German Chancellor Angela Merkel said terrorism, religious hatred, and intolerance cannot be allowed to win. We're horrified by the news that Christians in Sri Lanka were attacked and killed during Easter services, wrote Merkel's spokesperson on Twitter. We mourn them and pray for the injured and their family members. The German Foreign Office's Crisis Response Center wrote the situation in Sri Lanka was unclear and it was trying to determine whether German nationals were affected by the attacks. British Prime Minister Theresa May also described the acts of violence against churches and hotels in Sri Lanka are truly appalling, and my deepest sympathies go out to all of those affected at this tragic time, May said on Twitter. We must stand together to make sure that no one should ever have to practice their faith in fear. EU Commission Chief Jean-Claude Juncker expressed his horror and sadness. It was with horror and sadness that I heard of the bombings in Sri Lanka, costing the lives of so many people. Juncker said on Twitter, adding the European Union stood ready to help. I offer my heartfelt condolences to the families of the victims who had gathered to worship peacefully or come to visit this beautiful country, Juncker said.
Malacanang expressed condolences to the families of the victims of the explosions in Sri Lankan churches and hospitals that killed over nearly 300 people and injured 500 others on Catholic's Easter Sunday. Presidential spokesperson Salvador Panelo said the palace is offering sincere solidarity and heartfelt prayers to the people of Sri Lanka, renewing its commitment to boost ties. Panelo also expressed support for Sri Lanka as it begins the process of rehabilitation. As Sri Lanka currently sifts through the rubble and tries to find sense in this period of confusion and terror, we reiterate our expressions of support for our Asian neighbor as well as to other countries who are dealing with the same evil deeds, he said. The presidential spokesperson, meanwhile, condemned acts of terrorism, saying all nations should stand or join hands in stopping the unlawful use of force or violence to achieve peace.
Meanwhile, the Philippine National Police has intensified its intelligence information gathering in the wake of bombings in Sri Lanka. PNP Chief Oscar Albayalde said the PNP condemns the incident and offers sincere solidarity and heartfelt prayers to the people of Sri Lanka, renewing its commitment to boost ties. Take a look.
The PNP expresses solidarity with the international law enforcement community in condemning the civil acts of violence uncivil acts of violence against civilian targets that were carried out for no other purpose but to sow fear and terror. Ayaw naman natin ipakita sa ating mga kababayan na baka ang thinking nila baka yung iba baka nervyusin, no? Baka akala nila may threat. Although hindi natin ipinapasawalang bahala na posibleng merong din threat. Pero as of this time wala naman tayong nakukuha. So what we do is basically the intensification lang ng intel monitoring natin. We don't want to create undue apprehension sa ating mga kababayan.
The Sri Lankan government believes a local Islamist extremist group called the National Tawhid Jamaat, or NTJ, was behind the deadly suicide bomb attacks that killed nearly 300 people. Government spokesman Rajita Senaratne said. Senaratne, who is also a cabinet minister, added that the government was investigating whether the group had international support. Documents seen by AFP show Sri Lanka's police chief issued a warning on April 11, saying that a foreign intelligence agency had reported NTJ was planning attacks on churches and the Indian High Commission. Not much is known about the NTJ, a radical Muslim group that has been linked to the vandalizing of Buddhist statues. President Maitripala Sirisena's office said he would meet with Colombo-based diplomats tomorrow to seek international assistance.
Meanwhile, the U.S. State Department has warned of possible terrorist attacks in a revised travel advisory for Sri Lanka after a series of deadly blasts killed nearly 300 people, including Americans, in the island nation on Catholic's Easter Sunday. Sunday's attack saw suicide bombers target churches during Catholic's Easter services and high-end hotels in the capital, Colombo. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said several Americans were killed, the worst violence to hit Sri Lanka since a long and bloody civil war ended a decade ago. The latest U.S. travel advisory urged increased caution. Terrorist groups continue plotting possible attacks in Sri Lanka, it said. It added terrorists may attack with little or no warning, targeting tourist locations, transportation hubs, markets, shopping malls, and other public locations like hotels, clubs, restaurants, and places of worship. Travel advisories from other nations like Australia and Ireland will also suggest citizens exercise caution while in Sri Lanka. Security has been ramped up across the country as security forces hunt for suspects, with 24 people now arrested so far. Wary of sparking ethnic and religious tensions, the government has given few details about those detained. Authorities have said, however, that they are looking into whether the attackers had any overseas links.
And as tension remained high, police reported a fresh explosion as they attempted to defuse another suspected bomb found Monday near one of the three churches targeted. There were no further details, but police earlier also reported finding 87 bomb detonators scattered on the ground at a bus station and a nearby garbage dump. President Maitripala Sirisena's office said a state of emergency limited to counter-terrorism regulations only would be introduced from midnight Monday. The explosion happened around 50 meters from the St. Anthony Shrine, one of the three churches targeted in a string of suicide bombs on Sunday that killed nearly 300 people. The discovery comes after a series of 8 devastating bomb blasts ripped through high-end hotels and churches holding Catholic Easter services, killing at least 290 people, including dozens of foreigners. Meanwhile, an improvised pipe bomb discovered close to Colombo's main airport was successfully defused by the Sri Lanka Air Force, police said. A police source told AFP that a homemade pipe bomb had been found late Sunday on a road leading towards the main terminal, which remains open with heavy security after Easter Sunday's deadly bomb attacks. Police or Air Force spokesperson Group Captain Gihan Seneviratne said the IED was believed to be locally manufactured. There were disruptions to flights, but Sri Lanka's national carrier Sri Lankan has already asked leaving passengers to report to check-in counters at least 4 hours prior to departure because of tight security checks at the Bandaranaike International Airport.
To other news now, the popularity of French President Emmanuel Macron remains stuck at under 30% as he battles a series of political troubles with no major change reported after the Notre Dame fire, according to a poll on Sunday. According to the IFOP poll for the journal Du Dimanche, just 29% of people polled said they are satisfied with the job Macron is doing, with 69% dissatisfied. This April reading was unchanged from the last poll in March, according to the newspaper. The poll carried out up until April 20 was published at the end of a dramatic week for Macron, which saw him address the nation over the damage to the Notre Dame Cathedral in Monday's devastating fire. The president vowed to rebuild the Paris landmark in just 5 years, a target some observers see as over-ambitious. The fire also prompted him to shelve a speech planned for Monday, outlining his response to the Yellow Vest protests against social inequality that have shaken his young presidency. With tax cuts and other major reforms expected to be announced, Macron is to hold the first ever formal press conference of his presidency on Thursday. Macron enjoyed sky-high approval ratings of over 60% after coming to power in 2017 on the back of hopes of implementing major reform in France. But his popularity collapsed, with the Yellow Vest movement taking more of the momentum out of the presidency. Thursday's big press conference is seen as Macron's chance to regain the initiative.
Malacanang on Monday bared a matrix which shows the names of journalists and media organizations involved in an alleged plot to destroy the image of President Rodrigo R. Duterte. This comes after the Manila Times published the same matrix which the palace was supposed to release for the first time on Monday. In a speech in Tuguegarao on April 16, Duterte said intelligence reports have been fed to him from foreign sources about the supposed coordinated media plot to discredit him. Presidential spokesperson Salvador Panelo admitted that the president himself ordered him to release the matrix in a Malacanang press conference. However, the spokesperson clarified that he had no knowledge as to how the Manila Times managed to get a copy of the matrix even before the palace had released it. Panelo also denied that the office of the president gave the Manila Times a copy of the matrix. Panelo defended the matrix, stressing that the president has basis to release it and that it underwent proper validation. Among the names mentioned in the matrix are members of the National Union of People's Lawyers, the Philippine Center for Investigative Journalism, or PCIJ, and Rappler. According to Panelo, the matrix worked in such a way that a certain Bicoy, the source of these negative reports against the president, would provide stories to Vera Files President Ellen Tordesillas, who would later distribute the stories to the NUPL, PCIJ, and Rappler to write about. Panelo said the purpose of releasing the matrix is just to expose the plot or the ouster plot, but the palace would refrain from filing any charges against the journalists and media organizations involved at the moment. He, however, said overt acts to bring down the government made by these journalists and media organizations might force the palace to consider the filing of charges.
The source of that is from the office of the president, from the president himself. I don't know how he got one, but it's coming from the president. I talked to him the other day. You must remember that the president has so many sources. So he got this matrix from one of his sources. And I'm not even surprised that there is such a plot. If you notice, this has been going on. The pattern is clear, false news, and then transferred to another, and it circulates. So I'm not surprised at all.
To other news now, Sudan's army rulers demanded protesters remove blockades on roads leading to the military headquarters, where thousands of demonstrators have camped for days, calling on them to step down. Take a look. The The order came a day after protest leaders suspended talks with the ruling military council about transferring power to a civilian administration, the key demand of demonstrators. Protesters have massed outside the army complex since April 6, putting up barricades on roads leading to the area as well as checkpoints to frisk people coming to the rally.
مقنعة وجاء اجتماع الأمس ليدلل بشكل واضح على عدم جدية المجلس وفقا للموقف الذي نقلته عنه لجنته السياسية وممثليه الذين يعبرون عن النظام السابق الذين واحد الاستمرار في الاعتصام وتعليق التفاوض مع المجلس العسكري.
On Sunday, Sudan's new military ruler, General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, voiced dissatisfaction with protesters setting up checkpoints and searching those who come to the sit-in. Protesters vowed to remain at the checkpoints they have set up every few meters across the roads leading to the protest site in central Khartoum. Protesters have accused the military council of being little different from the ousted regime of veteran leader Omar al-Bashir, who was toppled by the army on April 11 following months of demonstrations. Since then, a 10-member military council led by Burhan has taken power. Protesters want the council to be dissolved and to hand power to a transitional civilian government.
Suspected jihadists killed at least 11 soldiers in an attack Sunday in central Mali, the defense ministry said. The military outpost at Gaire was attacked at around 5 in the morning, the ministry said, adding that there were also a number of injuries and damage. Earlier reports had put the number of soldiers killed at 10 or 12. The terrorists came out of the forest. They were on motorcycles and pickup trucks. They burned vehicles and took away others, a security source who asked not to be named told AFP. The Mali Armed Forces said on Twitter reinforcements were being sent to the Nara sector, about 370 kilometers north of the capital Bamako. Malian and foreign troops are regularly targeted by jihadist militia. Suspected jihadists killed 21 Malian soldiers last month in a raid on another army camp in Doura, central Mali.
A comedian with no political experience won a landslide victory in Ukraine's presidential election, drawing congratulations from global leaders while dealing a stunning rebuke to his country's political establishment. Take a look.
Я обіцяю, що ніколи не підведу вас всіх. Усім країнам пострадянського Союзу. Подивіться на нас. Усе можливо. 3, 2, 1!
That remark appeared aimed at neighboring Russia, where Vladimir Putin has been in power for 20 years, and many followed the Ukrainian election with keen interests. Volodymyr Zelensky, whose only previous political role was playing the president in a TV show, trounced the incumbent Petro Poroshenko by taking 73.2% of the vote, according to nearly complete official results released early Monday. Poroshenko garnered just 24.4%, losing to the 41-year-old comedian and actor across the country with 85% of ballots counted after Sunday's election. It was an extraordinary outcome to a campaign that started as a joke but struck a chord with voters frustrated by social injustice, corruption, and a war with Russian-backed separatists in eastern Ukraine that has claimed some 13,000 lives. The star of the TV series Servant of the People will now take the helm of a country of 45 million people beset by challenges and having run on the vaguest of political platforms. Congratulations poured in from Europe and beyond, with French President Emmanuel Macron and Poland's Andrzej Duda congratulating the Ukrainian president-elect by phone. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg and President of the European Council Donald Tusk said that they looked forward to continuing support and cooperation.
Police arrest climate protesters from the Extinction Rebellion movement blocking Waterloo Bridge in central London. Here's more.
I'm genuinely terrified. I think about it all the time. I'm so scared for the world. I feel like there's just going to be calamity in my lifetime, in my children's lifetime, and I don't feel comfortable even bringing children into this world knowing that that is coming. And I don't want people in the future to say to me, why didn't you do anything? We had the facts, we knew it was happening, why didn't you do anything?
They're ignoring and denying, and I think they are looking the other way. And I'm amazed, really, at the lack of consciousness that they have and the lack of responsibility that they should have towards this issue.
Oh my goodness, here he is.
Philippine Consul General Renato Pedro Villa in Washington, D.C. shares with Eagle News how overseas voting came to be, who are eligible to vote, when and how to vote, and what not to forget when accomplishing the ballots. Eliza Manglikmot reports.
The month-long overseas voting for the Philippine midterm elections has started April 13 and will continue until May 13, giving a chance for Filipinos living outside the Philippines to cast their picks for 12 seats in the Senate, all seats in the House of Representatives, plus regional, provincial, city, and municipal level elected positions. Joining Eagle News today is Consul General Renato Pedro Villa of the Philippine Embassy here in Washington, D.C. to share with us more information about the elections. Thank you for joining us, Consul General.
Thank you for the opportunity to for covering the elections here in the U.S.
Consul General, could you explain to us how did overseas voting come to place?
There was a clamor from the overseas Filipino workers and their families for them to participate in the voting process, to have a say in our political and economic future. Since they have contributed a lot, they are also contributing to our prosperity, to our progress. So I will wish to reiterate, once you receive your ballot from the mail, send it as soon as possible, accomplish the ballot carefully, and then seal it, and then send it back to us. I believe the stamp is not too much. It's just $1.30 here in the U.S.
Conjen, the last day is May 13. Does it mean the stamp on the mail has to be May 13, or you have to receive it by May?
We have to receive it on May 13.
If you're eligible, exercise your right because your vote counts. Reporting from the Consular Office of the Philippine Embassy here in Washington, D.C., I am Eliza Gonzalez Manglikmot for Eagle News, 1 with 25.
Japanese authorities on Monday hit Carlos Ghosn with a fresh charge of aggravated breach of trust and the fourth indictment against the former Nissan boss who promptly filed for bail. According to a statement from the Tokyo's prosecutor's office, Gon is accused of funneling millions of dollars in Nissan funds to a dealership in the Middle East and siphoning off around $5 million for personal use. The transfers were made with the purpose of benefiting himself by receiving part of the money, prosecutors charged. Shin Kokimoto from the Tokyo prosecutor's office told reporters they had enough evidence for guilty verdicts. However, the 65-year-old strenuously denies all allegations against him and insists they have been cooked up in a plot by Nissan executives wary of his plans to bring the Japanese car giant closer to its French partner Renault. Gon's lead lawyer, Hunichiro Hironaka, filed for bail just hours after the charge and said he was confident his client would be released as he prepares to fight the allegations. In order to prove his innocence at a trial as soon as possible, we want to approve our bail request so that we can prepare a good defense, Hironaka told reporters. Gon has already won bail once before, but under strict conditions, such as agreeing not to leave the country and living under surveillance. He also had to stump up 1 billion yen for bail, but Hironaka said they were prepared to produce more cash if necessary to secure his release. Monday was the end of the maximum period authorities had to question Gon, who is now technically in pre-trial detention.
And finally in our news, Philadelphia's Joel Embiid returned from injury to score a game-high 31 points and grab 16 rebounds, powering the 76ers to a 112-108 NBA playoff victory at Brooklyn. ABC Sports correspondent Norman Castro reports.
The Brooklyn Nets look to take the momentum back from the surging Philadelphia 76ers. Currently down 2-1 in the series, the Nets need to secure a win to not fall into a bigger hole.
The boisterous crowd at the Barclays Center proved to show a home court advantage for the Brooklyn Nets. The first quarter was a back-and-forth affair as both teams found the basket. Jarrett Allen kept moving off the ball and was rewarded with an alley-oop and an and one to give a spark to the Nets. Early in the second, the Sixers looked to be aggressive, led by Jimmy Butler and Tobias Harris. After trailing by 9 at the start of the second quarter, the Sixers finally closed the gap to take the lead in the middle of the second. The Nets fired back with the help of Jared Dudley by scoring a 3 at the top of the key. The Nets took that momentum and held a 6-point lead going into the third. The start of the third once again saw Allen score off of an alley-oop. It started to get a little testy down below when Embiid fouled Allen, which caused the scuffle. After everything was said and done, Jimmy Butler and Jared Dudley were ejected with Embiid issued a flagrant 2. The Nets continued to use the energy from the crowd and Dudley's ejection to hold the 6-point lead going into the fourth quarter. The Nets were able to maintain the lead going into the final 6 minutes of the game. But momentum shifted as Embiid made his presence known in the paint and scoring 8 straight points for the 76ers. With time winding down and now down 1 point, Embiid received the ball in the paint. After losing the handle, he was able to recover and find a wide-open Mike Scott for a lead-changing 3-pointer. After hustling back down the court, Allen found the ball down low but couldn't find the rim or an open man, leading to a turnover to ice the game for the Sixers. The Philadelphia 76ers beat the Brooklyn Nets 112-108 to take a 3-1 lead in the best-of-7 series.
And from Joel, you had 5 shots in the first half. You ended up scoring 31 points. Did the game plan change at halftime for you to be more aggressive, or was it about after Jimmy going out, you decided to?
No, the game plan has always been the same. You know, I just gotta be aggressive. These guys, they try to find me any ways they can, and I think I only got like, what, 10 minutes in the first half. So, you know, just got to play through the system, but, you know, it's all about, you know, they want me to be aggressive. Anytime he gets a chance to like post me up, he does it, anybody on the team. So, for me, it's just about being aggressive all the time, and they do a great job of finding me.
Coach Brett Brown talked about the offense and their success in a hard-fought battle.
Coach, right in the front. You were talking about the defense earlier, but can you talk about the offense, because you guys were really efficient down low, 62 points in the paint compared to 44, and Joel Embiid 12 out of 22, and Tobias Harris quietly with a 24. Can you talk about the offense?
I mean, the only hiccup I thought was, or the biggest hiccup was, we had the turnovers. You know, and I think we were playing catch-up after the first period. When you came in after the first period and they had 7 offensive rebounds and we had 7 turnovers, and you started looking at, I think they had 13 more shot attempts than we did just in the first period. You know, you're kind of lucky to only be down the margin that we were. I think that offensively, it is always a challenge reintroducing Joel back into the group, because there are times in my mind, like, I'll give him the ball every possession down the floor, and I almost mean that. And then, you know, like, sometimes you get stuck a little bit, it gets a little bit stagnant. And so we've won 2 ways. The last 2 games you would have seen, you know, not Joel, and it's maybe more flying around and 3 balls and so on, and then you have Joel and you got a unique gift and a target that needs touches. And so combining those 2 worlds is the challenge. Offensively tonight, I thought we did a decent job of that. Save the turnovers, I thought our offense did a good job.
D'Angelo Russell mentions how they can take advantage of the clogged paint against the 76ers.
How do you adjust to Joel Embiid and down low when he's clogging the lane with 2 or 3 people moving forward for your offense? How would you adjust to that in the next game?
Us defensively, what
On offense.
What do you mean?
When he was clogging the lane, you guys were getting alley-oops, but then when there was 2 or 3 people there, you guys kind of got a little stagnant. What can you adjust in those situations to?
I mean, I think that's part of their game plan. You know, he's a big guy. When he's clogging the lane like that, we're able to throw over the top and, you know, get in and kick it out. When there's 3 guys in there, it works to our favor. You know, like I said, we look at the film, see where the help's coming from, where their scouted help's coming from, and we capitalize on that. Simple as that.
Reporting to you for Eagle News, I am Norman Castro, and I am always 1 with 25.
Thank you, Norman.
Thanks, Norman. Don't forget to like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter and Tumblr. Also check out our boards and Pinterest and pictures on Instagram. I'm Sam Cepeda. Thanks for joining us.
And that's it for tonight's broadcast. I'm Alma Angeles, and
we're 1 with 25.